Bob Duke appeared to be the picture of an ordinary man, a devoted husband to Leanna Duke and a loving father to their 5-year-old son, Eric. To those who knew them, the Dukes seemed like any other young family, trying to build a future and create happy memories. Leanna was a kind and nurturing mother, always ensuring Eric's safety. She was the type of parent who held her child's hand in crowded places, who double-checked seatbelts before every trip, and who never let him wander too far. Eric was a bright and adventurous boy, fascinated by the outdoors. He loved playing outside, chasing lizards, and exploring the world around him with his mother by his side. They had a bond filled with love, laughter, and an unbreakable sense of trust. Their life seemed simple, unremarkable even, until tragedy struck. What was meant to be a relaxing family outing turned into a horrific event that shocked their small community. On that fateful day, Bob, Leanna, and Eric traveled to Flaming Gorge in Wyoming, a place known for its breathtaking views and steep, dangerous cliffs. According to Bob, the family had chosen the location for an afternoon picnic. He later claimed that while Eric was busy chasing lizards near the edge of the cliff, Leanna stood nearby watching over him. Bob insisted that he had walked back to the car to get a drink when he suddenly heard Leanna scream his name. Rushing back, he found them gone. When he looked over the edge, he claimed he saw their broken bodies lying on the jagged rocks below. Frantic, he called 911, his voice shaking as he told dispatchers that his wife and child had fallen. He said he could hear them gurgling, but wasn't sure if they were still alive. When rescue workers arrived, Bob was standing at the top of the cliff, appearing dazed but eerily composed. Something about the scene felt off from the beginning. The cliff, while steep, was not impossible to navigate. Yet, Bob insisted he had been unable to climb down to check on his family. Firefighters, however, found it relatively easy to descend the slope and reach the bodies within minutes. That was their first red flag. The second was Bob's demeanor. Most grieving husbands and fathers would be in shock, hysterical, inconsolable even. Bob, however, was disturbingly calm. He spoke casually as if discussing an unfortunate accident rather than the tragic deaths of his wife and child. The uneasy feeling among the rescue team only grew stronger. Common sense told them that a mother like Leanna, known for her protective nature, would never allow her child to get close enough to the cliff's edge for such an accident to occur. It simply didn't make sense. However, with no physical evidence pointing to foul play, the case was officially ruled an accident. Bob Duke collected $60,000 in life insurance money and walked away a free man. For 2.5 years, the case remained closed. The deaths of Leanna and Eric were considered an unfortunate tragedy, and Bob moved on with his life. But then, an old friend came forward with a stunning revelation, one that would turn the entire case upside down. Roger Brauberger had once been one of Bob Duke's closest friends, but something had always troubled him. 2.5 years after Leanna and Eric's deaths, Roger contacted the police with an explosive claim that Bob had asked him to kill his wife and child before they ever went to Flaming Gorge. According to Roger, Bob had approached him with a sinister proposal, offering him $20,000 to commit the murders. Bob had even planned out the details, suggesting that Roger shoot Leanna and Eric during a backyard barbecue, staging it as a random act of violence. He even instructed Roger to wound him in the arm to make the attack appear more believable. Roger had refused, disgusted by the idea. He had tried to brush it off, hoping it was just a sick joke. But when Leanna and Eric fell to their deaths shortly after that conversation, Roger suspected it was no accident. Yet, he remained silent. At the time, he believed it would have been his word against Bob's, and he knew that accusing a man who had just lost his family would not be taken lightly. But Bob Duke wasn't done killing. 2.5 years later, he approached Roger again, this time with an even darker request. Now, Bob wanted his parents dead. He once again offered Roger $20,000 to carry out the murders. He was running out of money. The insurance payout from Liana and Eric's deaths had been spent, and he needed a fresh source of cash. With his parents gone, he would inherit another large sum. This time, Roger knew he had to act. He went straight to the police and told them everything. Investigators were stunned. The man they had once believed to be a grieving husband and father was, in fact, a cold-blooded killer. But they needed proof. They set up a sting operation, instructing Roger to record his conversations with Bob. During a phone call, Bob laid out his plan in chilling detail. Originally, he wanted Roger to carry out the killings himself, but as the conversation progressed, Bob decided he would do it himself, with Roger serving as a lookout. He talked about signals, about ways to avoid drawing attention, and about making the crime look like a random burglary. That was all the FBI needed. On January 8, 2001, federal agents burst into a home in Houston, Texas, and arrested Bob Duke for conspiring to murder his parents. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. But the case was far from over. Now, with this new evidence, investigators turned their attention back to the deaths of Liana and Eric. The original ruling of accidental death no longer seemed plausible. They reopened the case, determined to prove what they had suspected all along. Bob Duke had murdered his family. While there was no forensic evidence, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. His original 911 call was suspicious. His story about not being able to climb down the cliff didn't hold up. His demeanor at the scene was unnatural. And most damning of all, Roger's testimony confirmed that Bob had planned to kill his family long before that day. Prosecutors built their case carefully, knowing they had to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. One of their strongest moves was bringing the jury to Flaming Gorge. They let them see the cliffs for themselves and let them understand how unrealistic Bob's version of events was. No mother would have let her child wander so close to danger. No father would have been so indifferent to their deaths. On August 15, 2002, the jury delivered their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Bob Duke was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Liana's family, the verdict brought some relief, but it could never bring back what they had lost. They had spent years mourning, believing they had lost their daughter and grandson to a tragic accident, only to find out they had been murdered by the very person meant to protect them. Bob Duke never showed remorse. He never admitted to the killings and never expressed guilt or sorrow. His parents, the very people he had plotted to kill, chose to remain silent, refusing to speak publicly about the case. But justice had finally been served. Bob Duke now spends his life behind bars at the United States Penitentiary in Florence, Colorado, a maximum security prison. His days of plotting for insurance money are over. He is no longer a free man, able to manipulate those around him. And though it took years, the truth finally emerged. Liana and Eric Duke didn't fall to their deaths. They were murdered. And their killer, the man who once called himself their husband and father, will never walk free again. Bob Duke's story is a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest threats come from those we trust the most. Yet, cases like this raise an important question. How many other crimes go unnoticed simply because the truth is buried beneath a carefully constructed lie? How many families have been torn apart by someone who hid their true nature behind a mask of normalcy? If something feels wrong, if your instincts tell you that a situation doesn't add up, don't ignore it. Speak up. Report suspicious behavior. Seek justice for those who can no longer speak for themselves, because in the end, the truth always has a way of coming to light, but only if people are willing to fight for it. Kevin and Diana Green were young, in love, and building a life together. Newlyweds, they had moved into a small apartment in Tustin, California, excited about the future ahead. Kevin, just 21 years old, was a corporal in the Marine Corps, steady in his career and ready to become a father. Diana, only 20, was 9 months pregnant with their first child. She had spent months preparing for the baby's arrival, decorating their small home with baby clothes, blankets, and hopes for the future. They had dreams like any other young couple, building a family, making a home, and sharing a lifetime. To Kevin, life was good. Maybe not perfect, but good enough. They had their share of arguments like any couple, but nothing he thought was out of the ordinary. He was focused on the big picture, the baby, and their future. He never could have imagined how quickly it would all come crashing down. On a Saturday night in September, Kevin and Diana were at home, doing what they often did, watching a movie. It was just another ordinary night. Around 1:30 in the morning, after the movie ended, Kevin got a craving for a cheeseburger. There was a Jack in the Box right across the street, an easy and quick trip. But when he saw the drive-thru backed up with cars, he decided to drive to another location about 15 minutes away. It was late, but he didn't think much of it. By the time he got back home, nothing was the same. The kitchen door was ajar, slightly open. That wasn't right. He had left it unlocked, sure, but now it was open. A strange feeling settled in his stomach as he stepped inside. And then, his world shattered. Diana was lying in their bed, blood pooling around her. Her face, her head was covered in blood. She wasn't moving. Panic surged through him. He thought she had been shot. He called 911, barely able to speak, his mind racing. The paramedics arrived quickly, rushing her to the hospital. At first, the doctors believed she had suffered a gunshot wound, but when they examined her closely, they realized that wasn't the case. Someone had beaten her so brutally that her skull had fractured, and worse, Diana wasn't the only victim. For hours, the doctors fought to save both her life and the life of the baby she had carried for 9 long months. Kevin held on to hope, praying for a miracle. But at some point in those early morning hours, the baby's heartbeat stopped. Diana was rushed in for an emergency cesarean section. The child they had dreamed of, planned for, waited for, was gone. And then, as if that loss wasn't devastating enough, Diana slipped into a coma. Kevin stayed by her side, waiting for any sign that she would wake up. But while he sat in the hospital, grieving for his child, something else was happening. The police had begun investigating, and their focus was turning toward him. Detective Steve Foster started calling the couple's neighbors, hoping for any clue about what had happened that night. What he found raised suspicions. Some of the neighbors mentioned hearing an argument between Kevin and Diana earlier that evening. Others said they had been called to the couple's apartment before for loud fights. To the police, it painted a picture of a troubled marriage, one where tempers flared and tensions ran high. And then there was Kevin's late-night trip. The detectives found it odd that he had chosen to drive 15 minutes away for food when there was a fast food restaurant right across the street. It didn't make sense to them. Why go so far when he could have been back in just a few minutes? It wasn't just the timeline that made them suspicious. There was also the matter of Kevin's story. He had told them he saw a black man standing near a black van outside his apartment when he left, and again when he returned home. To the detectives, it sounded too convenient. And then there was the physical evidence. Semen had been recovered from Diana's body. In 1979, there was no DNA testing, only blood type matching. The sample came back as O negative, an uncommon blood type, shared by less than 15% of the population. Kevin Green had O negative blood. To the police, this was enough. And then, 2 months after the attack, the final piece fell into place. Diana woke up. She had survived the brutal beating, but her memory had been affected by the trauma. Still, when she was finally able to communicate, she told her parents what she believed to be true. She was certain. She had no doubt. Kevin was the one who had attacked her. With that statement, Kevin was arrested. The case moved quickly. He was charged with second-degree murder for the death of his unborn child, as well as attempted murder and assault. The trial was emotional. Diana took the stand, visibly still affected by her injuries, and pointed at Kevin. The jury believed her. They deliberated for just 2 days before returning a guilty verdict. Kevin Green was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. For 16 years, Kevin sat in a prison cell, knowing he was innocent, knowing that his wife had unknowingly sent him there. And then, the truth finally came to light. Between 1978 and 1979, 6 other women had been attacked in a nearly identical way. Break-ins, brutal beatings, sexual assaults. Each attack followed the same pattern. But those cases remained unsolved. Then, in 1996, forensic science had advanced. DNA testing has become a powerful tool. Investigators decided to revisit evidence from those unsolved cases. They tested a sample from one of the rape kits. The results came back with a match. It wasn't Kevin Green. It was a man named Gerald Parker, an ex-Marine, a serial predator, known to law enforcement as the Bedroom Basher. He had been in and out of prison for years, committing violent crimes, and when the detectives confronted him, he confessed. He admitted that he had been standing outside the Greens' apartment that night. He had heard them arguing. He had waited for Kevin to leave, and when the coast was clear, he had slipped inside. 17 years after the crime, the truth was finally exposed. Detectives went to Kevin's prison to tell him, "There's a man in another prison who has confessed to attacking your wife," they said. "We have his DNA. We have his confession. You're getting out." After 16 years, 2 months, and 26 days, Kevin Green walked out of prison as a free man. Diana had been wrong. The police had been wrong. And Kevin had spent almost 2 decades paying for a crime he didn't commit. Kevin Green lost 16 years of his life for a crime he never committed. He lost his wife, his child, and his freedom, all because of a flawed investigation, a mistaken memory, and a justice system that saw what it wanted to see. His story is not just about wrongful conviction. It's about how easily assumptions can replace facts, how justice can fail, and how the truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds a way to surface. But Kevin's case is just one of many. Wrongful convictions happen more often than we think, leaving innocent people behind bars while the real criminals walk free. His story serves as a reminder that forensic advancements like DNA testing are crucial, that investigations must be thorough and unbiased, and that no case should ever be closed without absolute certainty. If this story has taught us anything, it's that the fight for justice doesn't end with a conviction. It only ends when the truth is undeniable. Fort Smith, Arkansas, was the kind of town where neighbors greeted each other on morning walks and families left their doors unlocked without a second thought. It was a place where Sunday mornings were sacred and the pews of Phoenix Village Baptist Church were filled with devoted members. One of those members was 58-year-old Juanita Wofford, a woman known for her unwavering faith and kind heart. She never missed a service, always sitting in her usual spot, singing hymns with the congregation. Her absence on June 6, 1993 morning sent a ripple of concern through the church. J.W. McAlpin, a fellow churchgoer, immediately noticed something was wrong. If Juanita could be at church, she would be. After the service, he and a friend decided to check on her, expecting perhaps that she had fallen ill. As they approached her home, an unsettling feeling crept over them. The front door was slightly ajar and an eerie silence filled the air. When they pushed the door open, their worst fears were realized. Blood stained the floor, streaked across the living room, and led toward the bedroom. Within moments, the horror of what had happened became clear. Juanita had been brutally attacked and sexually assaulted and killed in her bedroom. Detective Randy Cook, was the first officer to arrive at the scene. The signs of forced entry were immediately obvious. The screen door had been cut, and the front door had been kicked open. Inside, the home told a story of a violent struggle, one that ended with Juanita's life being taken in one of the most horrific ways imaginable. As the investigation began, police struggled to make sense of the crime. Who would do this? And why? Then another chilling detail came to light. Just 2 months earlier, an 89-year-old woman named Lily Jones had survived a strikingly similar attack. Her home, not far from Juanita's, bore the same signs of forced entry. She had been brutally assaulted but had managed to live. The similarities between the two crimes were undeniable, the same method of entry and the same violent nature. The police were dealing with a predator, someone targeting elderly women living alone, and they knew he would likely strike again. The investigation pressed forward, but leads were scarce. Then, in January 1994, a woman named Marlene walked into the Fort Smith Police Department with a suspicion that sent the case in a shocking new direction. She believed her brother, Danny Bennett, might be responsible for Juanita Wofford's murder. According to Marlene, Danny had a history of disturbing behavior, particularly toward women. He lived near Juanita's home, and in her eyes, he fit the profile of the kind of man who could commit such a crime. Police wasted no time in bringing Danny in for questioning. What happened next defied all expectations. Almost immediately, Danny confessed. He gave detectives chilling details about the crime, details that had never been released to the public. He described the pool of blood in the living room, even mimicking the way Juanita's body had been dragged. His confession was so detailed, so precise, that investigators had no reason to doubt him. They had their man. Danny was charged with Juanita Wofford's murder, as well as the sexual assault of Lily Jones. The town breathed a sigh of relief. For a while, it seemed like justice had been served. But that relief would be short-lived. A year and a half later, in August of 1995, another woman was found dead under eerily similar circumstances. Ruth Henderson, 74 years old, was discovered in her farmhouse in Crawford County. Like the previous victims, she had been brutally attacked, sexually assaulted, and murdered. Sergeant Luther Larry, one of the investigators who had worked on the Wofford case, immediately recognized the pattern. It was as if history was repeating itself, and that meant one terrifying thing. They had arrested the wrong man. The real killer was still out there. Despite Danny Bennett's detailed confession, the charges against him were dropped. He was released from custody, and the police were back to square one. But the trail had gone cold, and for 5 long years there were no new arrests. The families of the victims were left with more questions than answers, wondering if the monster who had stolen their loved ones would ever be caught. Then, on March 28, 2000, everything changed. In a shocking twist, Bubba Qualls and his wife Sheila returned to their home in Crawford County to find an unfamiliar truck parked in their driveway. It belonged to their neighbor, Charles Ray Vines. Bubba thought it was odd, but didn't think much of it until he stepped inside his house. What he saw would stay with him forever. Vines was inside, attacking his daughter. Chaos erupted. Sheila grabbed the phone, frantically calling the police as Bubba confronted the intruder. When officers arrived, they arrested Vines on the spot. He was charged with rape and attempted murder, but as investigators dug deeper, they realized they had stumbled upon something far bigger than a single attack. Inside an interrogation room, Charles Ray Vines sat across from detectives, the weight of his crimes pressing down on him. At first, he remained silent. Then the confessions began. He admitted to the brutal rape of Lily Jones, the elderly woman who had survived years earlier. He admitted to killing Juanita Wofford. And then, he confessed to the murder of Ruth Henderson. Vines described his crimes in horrifying detail. He had been drinking, he said, and wanted sex. He knew Juanita Wofford lived alone, making her an easy target. He talked about the way he had overpowered her, the way he left no witnesses. But it was what he said next that sickened even the most hardened detectives. When asked how pleasurable the assaults were on a scale of 1 to 10, he grinned. 14, he said. It was the greatest sex I've ever had. The detectives knew without a doubt that they weren't dealing with just a killer. They were dealing with a monster. The trial of Charles Ray Vines was swift. In 2001, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder, 1 count of rape, and 1 count of attempted murder. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms in prison, ensuring he would never again walk free. Before he was led away, investigators had one last question for him. How did he feel when Danny Bennett was arrested for his crimes? Vines smirked. "I was glad it was him," he said. "I felt like I was in the clear." It was a chilling admission. An innocent man had come terrifyingly close to spending his life in prison for crimes he didn't commit. But in the end, the truth had won out. Vines was sent to the Arkansas Department of Corrections, where he remains to this day. For the families of Juanita Wofford and Ruth Henderson, there was some relief in knowing the real killer had been caught. But closure? That would never come. Nothing could erase the fear their loved ones had felt in their final moments. Nothing could bring them back. Even today in Fort Smith, Arkansas, the memory of those crimes lingers like a dark shadow. A town once known for its quiet streets and close-knit community had been forever changed. Evil had come to their doorstep, and for years it had walked among them, unnoticed. The story of Charles Ray Vines is one of horror, injustice, and, ultimately, justice delayed but not denied. For years, he prowled unnoticed, targeting the most vulnerable members of his community, women who trusted the safety of their own homes. He took their lives without remorse, leaving behind shattered families and a town that would never be the same. Worse still, his crimes nearly cost an innocent man his freedom. While Vines now sits behind bars, his case is a haunting reminder of how easily the wrong person can be accused, and how crucial thorough investigations are in the pursuit of justice. The people of Fort Smith will never forget the fear that gripped their town during those dark years, nor the relief that came when the real monster was finally unmasked. Justice is not just about catching criminals, it's about ensuring the right people are held accountable. Cases like this highlight the importance of advancements in forensic science, continued support for law enforcement training, and public vigilance. If there's one lesson to take from this, it's that evil can exist anywhere, even in the safest of places. But so can justice, so can truth. And we all have a role to play in making sure innocent people are protected while true criminals face the consequences of their actions. Stay aware, support victims, and demand justice. As history has shown, sometimes the difference between freedom and a lifetime behind bars is simply